This is Steamboat. It isn't the toughest mountain airport to fly into. I wouldn't even say that it's a tough airport to fly into, especially when the weather's nice. But it's surrounded by mountains and it's high. It's 6,882 feet above sea level. And as we fly in this evening, it makes a pretty practical example for solid descent planning. Something we all do, right? You don't need to be in the mountains to find obstacles. You can find them here, or here, or here. The mountains do make good obstacles. They're high, they're hard, and usually they're unlighted. Keep in mind, Steamboat isn't backcountry flying. The runway's pretty long, especially compared to this. And it's paved. And as far as mountain airports go, it's relatively open. Hey, if you're looking for a paved challenge, you can get more pucker factor for your buck out of some other Colorado airport. Take Telluride. You approach through a narrow canyon. To your right, the Coors Beer Mountain. It is a real mountain, even if it doesn't taste like real beer. Or Aspen. It's tower controlled with an 8,000-foot runway. The valley's 6 miles wide, which sounds pretty big until you add in winds. Or you get stuck holding over the city. And did I mention business jets? This place is a magnet for Falcons and Gulfstreams. Compared to these, Steamboat's on the serene side, but before you launch your first solo flight into the hills, knock out a mountain checkout with a CFI. Steamboat's surrounded by mountains to the east and to the south. The airport sits at nearly 6,900 feet, and the mountains to the east range from 10,500 to 12,000 feet. To the south, 12 to 13,000. Planning your descent means avoiding terrain. Passes, holes, valleys, they all can help. If the field is tight or your mountain experience is limited, a practice flight into the airport with a CFI or a local expert is a great bet. Not only will you pick out paths through the terrain, they'll show you where to expect updrafts and downdrafts, and good outs if you get into trouble. If you're plotting your own course, the state's aeronautical directory is a great place to start. Colorado's aeronautical directory lists the major mountain passes and describes how the winds will affect your flight through. And you don't have to request them by mail anymore. Almost every state has them online. For our flight into Steamboat, Rabbit Ears Pass is an option. The mountains we'll cross east of Steamboat range between 10,500 to 12,000 feet, and Rabbit Ears Pass, it cuts through at 9,600. It's named for the two rocks that look like, you guessed it, rabbit's ears. They're actually lava shafts from an ancient volcano. And while the ears are easy to miss, the highway through the pass is generally pretty easy to see. But we'll be coming in during the late afternoon where the light is low, so terrain, the road, they could be hard to see. And the mountaintop winds could be high. So we'll check out other options. At some airports, you'll find a charted visual approach. This is pretty rare. In Colorado, there's only one. Aspen, the Roaring Fork visual, and it needs it. It's surrounded by 14ers on 3 sides, and it's one of the busiest towered airports in mountain country.
Skywest 5478, turn left heading 290.
290, Skywest 5478.
November 4 Kilo Mike, turn to right heading 220.
Right on 220, triple 4 Kilo Mike.
When you consider all the jet and piston traffic on a VFR day, the charted visual comes in handy. But more on that later. It's not an option at Steamboat. If you're looking for a guaranteed way to avoid terrain, flying an instrument approach is often your best choice. You get a pre-planned, easy-to-follow route guaranteeing you your height above those little pointy rocks. And you get a descent profile to help you get down. Steamboat has 2 approaches, the VOR DME-C and the RNAV GPS-E. Both are non-precision, but will fly the GPS. Its minimum descent altitude is a little bit lower, by 160 feet, but on a beautiful evening like this, that won't make any difference to us at all. The big advantage here is simplicity. The Cirrus Perspective Avionics will draw a glide path as we descend from our en route altitude to the final approach fix. We call this VNAV for vertical navigation, and many of the WAAS-enabled GPS systems have this capability. The big advantage? We make a smooth descent through each step-down fix without leveling out. We're following that V on our electronic glide slope indicator. It's more comfortable, and we make less power adjustments, so it's easier. Most aircraft don't have VNAV capability though, but not much changes. Instead of a smooth descent, you can descend down and level off after each fix on each segment of the instrument approach. You still get the same obstacle protection, it's just a little higher workload. Or you can calculate a descent rate to simulate VNAV. We'll talk about that in another video. We're still left with a problem. The approach takes us to 7,980 feet, which is 1,100 feet above the airport. In fact, the traffic pattern is at 7,900. If we fly a constant angle from our final approach fix past our step-down fixes, we're left with a 7.75 degree descent angle. And that's not a little above 3 degrees. That's a 1,365 foot per minute descent at 100 knot ground speed.
Yeah, this is definitely a dump in, isn't it?
Minimums.
Yeah, so this is where the approach is going to stop you. You can see that a normal descent to landing here, not that easy. It is not easy.
So we're left with a couple of options. One, I can fly down to the MDA, join an upwind over the runway, and fly the pattern. Essentially, a true circling approach. This has a big advantage. I can follow my usual traffic pattern speeds and power settings, and those known references make a smooth landing a better bet. Or I can descend down to the approach once visually clear of the obstacles to join a normal glide path.
Okay, we are set up for landing. Flaps is set. I'll slow to 85 on final.
500.
It's not the easiest solution, partially because the PAPI on runway 32 is NOTAM'd out of service. So I'm left with my not so infallible judgment, and the knowledge that a go-around is always an option at this field. As we're coming in, I'm picking up a common winter visual illusion, especially when there's low light.
A little bit of a cliff here. In the light, you can't tell if it's a cliff.
Is that a hill, or is it a drop-off just before the runway? It's hard to tell with no color variation because of the white snow and the low light. If it was a hill, it may be hard to avoid until I'm too close, but from past experience and from the airport facility directory, I know it's a drop-off. Which leaves me with my second illusion, the black hole effect. I can clearly see the runway, I can read the numbers, and I can pick out the center line. But with the bright mountains lit up by the sunset, the dark runway looks like a black hole, which leads to a common nighttime landing illusion, flaring too high. What can you take from this? Because you probably won't ever fly into Steamboat. Is there any crossover, charting your way down through terrain on your cross countries? You don't need mountains to fly into terrain. Hills, buildings, trees, they'll all do fine. Maybe it's a reason to get your instrument rating, taking an approach into an airport when the terrain's unfamiliar or it's getting dark. And maybe it's a reason to fly that standard pattern instead of the straight in. It's a lot easier to make that 3-degree glide slope work out. And everybody loves a soft landing.